The moment I opened my front door, I knew I wasn't walking into the surprise my husband had promised. I'm Captain Emily Carter. I was still wearing my Army dress uniform. My 1-year-old daughter, Lily, rested against my shoulder, her tiny fingers playing with one of my service ribbons, while I tried to understand why my living room was filled with people who wouldn't look me in the eye. My husband's entire family was there. His parents, his sister, 2 uncles, 3 aunts, even neighbors who had known us for years. No one smiled. No one welcomed me home. They were all looking at me the same way people look at someone they've already judged. Ryan stood beside the coffee table holding a large white envelope. He didn't kiss me. He didn't ask about my day. He waited until I stepped fully inside. Then he quietly closed the front door behind me. The click of the lock echoed through the house. That's when my stomach tightened. I suddenly realized no one had gathered to celebrate anything. They were waiting for me. I shifted Lily higher on my hip, forcing a small smile. "What's going on?" Ryan didn't answer. He pulled a folded document from the envelope and laid it on the coffee table, as carefully as if he were presenting evidence in a courtroom. When he finally looked at me, his expression was colder than I'd ever seen. I had a DNA test done. I frowned, not understanding. He pointed toward Lily without taking his eyes off me. And according to these results, he paused just long enough for every person in the room to lean forward. She isn't my daughter. For a heartbeat, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Then his mother stood, pointed at my little girl, and shouted the words that changed my life forever. "Take that child and get out of my house." The words settled over the room like smoke. No one looked at me anymore. They were all looking at Lily. She had stopped smiling. Her little fingers clung to the metal ribbons on my uniform while she searched my face, too young to understand the words, but old enough to recognize that something was terribly wrong. I forced myself to breathe. "Ryan," my voice barely sounded like my own. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped the paper with one finger. The results speak for themselves. I took a step toward the coffee table. "I've never even seen that report." "You don't need to," Margaret snapped. "We already have." She stepped between me and Ryan as if she were protecting him from me. "My son has lived with your lies long enough." A dozen eyes followed every movement I made. Not one person asked me for my side. Not one person questioned where the report had come from. They had already reached their verdict before I walked through the front door. I looked around the room, searching for one familiar face willing to meet my eyes. Instead, I saw people quietly looking away. That hurt more than Ryan's accusation. I shifted Lily higher against my shoulder and whispered, "We're leaving." Margaret pointed toward the entrance. "That's the smartest thing you've said all night." I had taken only one step when the front door opened. No one had knocked. The room instinctively turned toward the entrance. A tall man in an Army service uniform stepped inside with the calm confidence that only comes from decades of command. 3 silver stars rested on his shoulders. Lieutenant General David Mercer. Every military instinct I possessed took over before I could think. I straightened automatically. "Good evening, sir." He returned the salute with a slight nod before his eyes settled on my face. "Captain Carter." His expression softened for only a moment. "I hope I'm not interrupting." No one answered. The silence became so complete, I could hear Lily's uneven breathing against my shoulder. General Mercer slowly looked around the living room. His eyes paused on the crowded chairs. Ryan standing stiffly beside the coffee table. Margaret still pointing toward the front door. Then they settled on the tears gathering in Lily's eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I was invited here," he said evenly, "to personally congratulate one of my officers on her outstanding service." He glanced back at me, I wasn't expecting this. Ryan forced a smile that looked painfully unnatural. General, it's just a private family matter. So I gathered. The general's voice never became louder. It didn't need to. Years of command carried more authority than shouting ever could. His attention shifted to the single sheet of paper lying on the coffee table. The document everyone seems to be relying on. He looked at Ryan. May I see it? Ryan hesitated. Only for a second. Then he handed it over. General Mercer unfolded the report without saying another word. The room became so quiet I could hear the paper moving between his hands. He read every line carefully, not quickly, not casually, like a man who had spent an entire career making decisions that depended on facts instead of emotions. Nearly a minute passed before he lowered the page. His eyes remained on the document as he asked his first question. Who arranged this DNA test? I did, Ryan answered immediately. Were both parents present when the samples were collected? Ryan hesitated. No. Were the identities of the individuals verified during collection? I'm not sure. The general looked up for the first time. Did Captain Carter ever consent to this testing? No, I answered before Ryan could. No, sir. His eyes met mine for only a second before returning to Ryan. Then he folded the paper with remarkable care and placed it back on the table. I've spent 36 years evaluating evidence, he said quietly. This, he rested one hand on the report, isn't evidence. The confidence disappeared from Ryan's face. For the first time that evening, I watched certainty give way to doubt. And suddenly, the people who had been judging me moments earlier no longer looked quite so sure of themselves. General Mercer never told anyone they were wrong. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, looking around the room with the quiet patience of someone who had spent a lifetime separating facts from assumptions. I strongly recommend, he said, that no one makes another accusation until this matter has been verified through an accredited laboratory. No one answered. Even Margaret lowered her eyes. A few relatives who had been staring at me only moments earlier suddenly found the carpet far more interesting. The room had changed, not because anyone believed me, because for the first time they weren't completely sure they believed Ryan. General Mercer turned toward me. Captain Carter? Yes, sir. I believe you and your daughter should spend tonight somewhere safe. I nodded. It was the first thing anyone had said all evening that felt less like judgment and more like protection. As I carried Lily toward the door, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Ryan wasn't looking at me. He was watching his family. One by one, almost as if he were checking whether everyone had played their part. The thought disappeared as quickly as it came, but years in the army had taught me to trust small observations. People often revealed themselves in the moments they thought no one was watching. Outside, I buckled Lily into her car seat with shaking hands. General Mercer waited until I closed the door before speaking. People who already believe a lie rarely change their minds because of louder arguments. He handed me one of his business cards. They change their minds when they're confronted with evidence they can't explain away. Thanked him, but my thoughts were somewhere else. Ryan hadn't looked frightened inside that house. He'd looked expectant, as if he'd been waiting for me to react. On the drive to Rachel's house, that feeling refused to leave me. What if the fake DNA report wasn't the plan? What if it was only the first move? Rachel Collins opened the door before I reached the porch. She took one look at my face, wrapped me in a hug, and quietly carried Lily inside. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, "You're safe here." Hours later, after Lily had fallen asleep, I sat alone at Rachel's kitchen table. My phone lit up again. 23 missed calls. 9 voicemails, dozens of text messages. The first ones were angry. "Where are you? Running away only makes you look guilty." Then the tone changed. "Let's talk like adults." Another message appeared minutes later. "Mom says you embarrassed everyone by leaving." I read that message 3 times. Embarrassed everyone? Margaret had ordered me out of the house. Now they were acting as though I had stormed out on my own? That wasn't panic. That was narrative control. Ryan wasn't trying to convince me anymore. He was already rewriting the story for everyone else. Rachel slid a mug of coffee across the table. "They're trying to decide what people remember." I looked up. She was right. Ryan hadn't invited his family because he wanted witnesses to the truth. He wanted witnesses to a performance. And suddenly another memory surfaced. The chairs. There had been too many chairs. Not borrowed after guests arrived. Already arranged before I walked through the front door. Every seat had been waiting. Every person had been placed. No one had gathered by accident. Someone had organized that room long before I came home. I whispered the thought before I even realized I was speaking. This wasn't an argument. Rachel frowned. What was it? I looked back at my phone. It was a rehearsed event. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then another question hit me. If Ryan had planned that night so carefully, why did it have to happen that particular evening? What was so important about getting me out of the house before morning? That question stayed with me until sunrise. I had a feeling the answer wasn't on the fake DNA report. It was still waiting somewhere inside that house. The first person I called wasn't Ryan. It was the attorney whose name General Mercer had written on the back of his business card. Melissa Grant listened without interrupting while I explained everything, from the fake DNA report to the messages I had photographed on Ryan's laptop. When I finished, she slowly set my phone on her desk. "Captain Carter," she said, "this stopped being a family disagreement the moment your husband began creating evidence and moving marital assets." She opened a legal file. "From now on, let the facts speak for you." That became my mission. Within days, Melissa petitioned the court for an accredited DNA test, financial records, and preservation of electronic evidence. Ryan's attorney objected to almost everything, but the judge approved the requests. "The truth," the judge said, "has nothing to fear from proper procedure." A week later, Ryan and I sat across from each other inside a certified laboratory. This time there were no homemade reports, no anonymous paperwork. Every identity was verified. Every sample was collected in front of witnesses. Every seal was documented. As the technician gently swabbed Lily's cheek, she reached for my hand and wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. Ryan wouldn't look at either of us. For the first time since all this began, he looked nervous instead of confident. Melissa leaned toward me. "Whatever those results say, no one can question how they were obtained." 3 days later, the report arrived. Melissa opened the envelope, read the first page, then smiled. "I think you'd better read this yourself." My hands trembled as I looked down. Probability of paternity, 99.9999%. I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised, because I finally had proof no one could dismiss. Ryan had accused me of betraying our marriage while knowing the accusation rested on a worthless report. The lie was officially over. But Melissa wasn't finished. She slid another folder across her desk. The DNA wasn't the biggest problem. Inside were bank records tracing nearly $42,000 from our joint savings into an account Ryan had opened months earlier without my knowledge. There were closing documents connected to the planned sale of our home. A consultation invoice from a divorce attorney dated weeks before the family gathering. And printed copies of the messages between Ryan and Vanessa. One sentence was highlighted. "Once she's out of the house, everything else becomes easy." Melissa looked at me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. The final hearing took place 6 weeks later. Ryan sat quietly beside his attorney. Margaret occupied the first row of the gallery. She no longer carried the confidence I'd seen the night she pointed me toward the front door. The judge reviewed each exhibit one by one: the accredited DNA report, the banking records, the hidden account, the electronic messages, the timeline. Every document fit together so precisely that no explanation could separate them. Ryan's attorney attempted to argue that emotions had clouded everyone's judgment. The judge shook his head. This court is not concerned with emotions. He held up the certified DNA report. It is concerned with facts. Then he looked directly at Ryan. You publicly accused your wife using unverified material while secretly transferring marital funds and coordinating actions designed to remove her from the family home. The courtroom fell silent. There is a difference, the judge continued, between believing something that later proves false and deliberately creating circumstances to make an innocent person appear guilty. Ryan lowered his head. For the first time since I had married him, he had nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered near the entrance, but I walked past every microphone. I wasn't interested in telling my story anymore. The evidence had already told it. General Mercer was waiting near the courthouse steps. He smiled as Lily reached for him. Permission to congratulate you, Captain? I laughed for what felt like the first time in months. Permission granted, sir. He looked toward the courthouse. I told you that arguments rarely change minds. You did. And what changes them? I looked down at the folder resting against my side. The truth. He nodded. No. I frowned. The truth. He paused just long enough for me to understand. Properly proven. As I carried Lily toward my car, I thought back to the night I stood in my living room believing my life had ended. I had walked into that house thinking I was coming home. Instead, I walked into an ambush. But Ryan made one mistake that changed everything. He believed humiliation was stronger than integrity. He believed a lie repeated often enough would become the truth. He forgot something every soldier eventually learns. Facts don't panic. Evidence doesn't forget. And sooner or later, the truth always reports for duty. As I drove away with Lily beside me, I realized something I wish I'd understood much sooner. Trust should never replace truth. The people who wanted me to feel ashamed counted on silence, fear, and confusion. They believed humiliation would make me stop asking questions. Instead, it taught me something every soldier eventually learns. Facts don't panic. Evidence doesn't forget. And when the truth is given the chance to stand on its own, it doesn't need anyone to defend it. If my story reminded you that integrity is worth protecting, even when you're standing alone, I hope you'll carry that lesson with you. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who believes the truth always deserves a chance to be heard. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.